Hmm.
Hey, hello. Nice to see you guys.
Hey, welcome.
Hello, everyone. Welcome again. Let's give it a start, and then people might keep joining till next 10 minutes. Can everybody hear me properly?
Yes, okay.
Everyone's perfect. Hello, everyone. Welcome again. Let's give it a start, and then people might keep joining till next 10 minutes. Okay, it's so nice that everybody joined, or we have all our speakers. And let's give it a start. We have Paul Gerritsen, Director of Delta Metropole over here. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I hope everybody is having a good day till now, and we are very excited to start this meeting and have a good discussion over the afternoon. So I see now that people are gradually already settling down with this new digital format. So we are doing this for the second time. This is the 6th new planning dialogue. And we tried this in the previous one. And we did learn a lot of small and big technical things during the last one, but there might be still some ups and downs today. So please bear with us and help us improvise. We are expecting around 50 to 60 participants. I can see right now we are around 32. So there might be new people joining in next few minutes. I'm Alankrita Sarkar. I'm working with Delta Metropolis Association. I'm the project leader for the new planning. And I'll be one of the moderators for today. Paul Gerritsen and Matthias Lenher will be helping me in some parts of the session for the moderation. And we'll be having a lot of conversation with various panel members, and we really want it in a more interactive session. So we really want our audience to jump in with questions and discussions wherever they want to join. Matthias, I cannot see you yet. Are you there already?
Yes, I'm there, and I can see me myself.
Oh. Just maybe try rejoining once more if you can, if that is fine, because
I'm not sure if other people can see me and hear me.
we can hear you definitely.
And see you.
I
Okay,
can see him
you.
also. Yes.
That's good. Okay. So Paul Gerritsen, the director of Delta Metropolis Association, will be one of the moderators for today. Paul, you want to say hi to everybody?
Sure. Hi. Very welcome also from my side. We are in different rooms in the same building, so actually we're all spread out, funnily enough, throughout the office now, in order to avoid strange zooming sounds. Yeah, very welcome also from my part.
Yeah. Thank you. Matthijs Lehner, he's the program manager from BNA International and Next Step program. He will be helping us moderating some of the parts as well. And he has a really important role to conclude the session. So welcome, Matthijs.
Thank you very much, Alan-Greta, and thanks for inviting us. And we are happy to be a bit of a co-organizer of this very interesting event today.
Thank you so much. Let's see how nicely we can continue today. This is always a question with the digital setup. We don't know where it falls down, but let's give it a try. So to just have a smooth session today, there are a few instructions that I would like to remind all of you. You might have already received the email from us, but these are some practical points. So for all the speakers, panel members, moderators, we would like to keep it as crisp and short as possible. And let's try to finish it on time. We want to make it as interactive as possible, but it is really essential that all the audience are muted most of the time unless and until they are asking any question. The chat box is you're very much welcome to write your questions, any issues that you're having, any technical issues for the chat box. Malvika from our side will be keeping an eye over the chat box. And you can also ask specific questions to her in terms of technical problems.
Yes, hi everyone.
And sometimes we might ask you to turn off the video so that we can just have the panel members on the screen and the panel discussion can go on a bit smoothly. We are dividing ourselves in smaller breakout rooms in the mid of the session. So please don't leave the meeting anytime during the whole session. We'll make sure that you are in the right place at the right time. During the coffee break, we would suggest that you just switch off your video and switch off the audio and you can take the break time. Lastly, we advise all of you to rename yourself in the Zoom setting. There is an option at the right bar of participants where you can rename yourself and just put your name and organization so that everybody knows who else is joining the meeting and who is speaking at what time. Please keep that in mind that this session is being recorded and it is also being live streamed on YouTube. So we might also take some photos and screenshot during the meeting. So let's start with the program today. As I already mentioned, Paul and Matthijs will be helping me with the moderation part. This is the program for today. We are dividing the whole program into 4 parts. The first 2 parts are 2 panel discussions. Paul Gerritsen would be the moderator during this part. The third part is presentations from Archides Netherlands and Be Sustainable Brussels. And the fourth part is the reflecting back part where we will have smaller breakout sessions and Matthijs will be helping us with the conclusion. So I don't know if everybody knows about new planning already or not. So just a super small introduction to new planning dialogue. So the new planning dialogue is a combination of research, dialogue, and community of practice. And we are also now working on the end results and publication. And this project aims to stimulate a change in the practice of spatial planning to ensure a more sustainable and inclusive development in the Dutch context as well as the European context. So we are taking help from our European friends and peers who are learning with us, but also giving us some inspiration to work in the spatial planning background. We discuss various scales and subjects to answer the big question that how to effectively plan for the big challenges. We already have had 5 successful activities. This is a series of 8 activities and we are in the 6th one now. In last 5, we have discussed about the current urgencies in planning, defining the right ambitions, about the national planning vision, the regional scale and the formalization part. And the most recent one was the city scale one, where we discussed about the city visions and decision-making process. That was the first digital event of the series. And today we are doing the 6th one. And we are still left with 2 upcoming interesting sessions in October. So keep in touch with us. And those sessions are more about the role of planner and role of spatial planning and design and the mega region scale focusing on Eurodelta. So I would like to mention that today's event partners are BNA International and Archidus Netherlands. They have been contributing a lot to develop the program and supporting us to develop the content for today. Topic for today is super interesting for both our partners, but also all the new planning enthusiasts. In the recent times, we are all focusing and questioning a lot about the global agreements and today we are trying to take this opportunity to check that how relevant they are in today's planning context, how important they are to plan and provide us a guideline for the planning system, and as well as to see how we can apply these in our projects. So, of course, in some way or the other, these are providing a direction to the planning system. But at the same time, the question remains that what exactly are the definitive roles for these agreements and declarations? So let's do a quick exercise. We start with a small Mentimeter reactions for everybody. You can just follow this link or go to menti.com. Leah, my colleague, is already putting it in the chat box, so you can follow that link and put your responses. I'll share the screen so that you all can see what everybody is answering. Can everybody access this? Yeah, I can see nice answers coming in. Okay, quite nice. I think I'll give some more time for everybody to start answering this while I ask, I would like to ask Paul Gerritsen that he is the initiator of the new planning dialogue and he strongly feels about this subject. So first of all, I would like him to react on this audience response. What does he feel about it? And also, please tell us that what do you expect from today's session and how important are these agreements according to you?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Alankrita. I'm not so sure if I'm the initiator of this program. I think it's important to mention that this the new planning initiative started out as a conversation between practice and academia. So our conversation with TU Delft, with Vincent Nedin, Professor Nedin at that moment. We had this conversation that actually how can it be that planning plays such a minor role in times of this radical and global change? Should not planning, particularly in the Netherlands, play a much bigger role in informing policy, informing change, also societal change? And how can it be that although planning for a long time very much institutionalized in the Netherlands, has been put politically next to the garbage in this time where we really need to look forward in order to cope with this sort of mind-boggling change that is that we need to deal with. So how can it be that this capacity for looking into the future is so much devaluated? And so that was the main question, and we thought it would be useful to not do this within the context of the Netherlands, but particularly seek contact with our colleagues in all over the world, but particularly in Europe, to start a process of well, inspire each other. And I think this is an important element of this. This is also why we're doing this as an international series of meetings at the moment. And I think it's also very important to see the inspiration that we can get from different areas outside of the Netherlands. So basically, I think that's an important aspect. I would also today like to see if we can get some inspiration from elsewhere. Perhaps also, even though you might be from the Dutch context, you would know certain examples from elsewhere, and maybe they can inspire us. Because I think it's important to mention that for today we have this this focus. So we have done numerous subjects, you could say, within the new planning, coping with different skills, with the new national vision. We late last year did a big conference about that. We've done the peer reviews between cities, but today we would like to focus on the role and the purpose for planning in regards to a large international agreements and declarations. How do they inform our planning? How can we use them? How can we operationalize them? I think it's important to state that actually in the Netherlands we've lost a little bit of this capacity of looking ahead, planning for that. We don't have a really great track record when it comes, for instance, to the energy transition or to our natural environment. Explosive livestock issues that we have, excessive mobility. Somehow we've lost our way in many of these very challenging subjects, and we need to change, and therefore it's important to see how this international declarations can play a role in it. I think it's important to maybe look back a little bit. It's interesting to note that if we look at the Paris Climate Agreement, I think by far one of the most important agreements we have currently, keeping our, or at least that's the goal, and the climate change, the change of temperature well below 2 degrees, is definitely a historic agreement, and is setting a lot of things in motion at the moment. But it's important to think back maybe a little bit when at the moment when this kind of declarations were very much seen as a solution to our big challenges. And that is almost 30 years ago in November 1989, when there was the first international conference on climate change in Noordwijk in the Netherlands, ironically actually chaired by Ed Nijpels, our current National Climate Agreement chair. I don't know how many of you read the article from a couple of years ago from the New York Times Magazine, Losing Earth, which described the whole process around actually the failing of reaching agreement at that moment. If you read that article by Nathiel Rich, it's interesting to see that actually at that moment we thought this kind of international agreement would be able to cope with these very difficult subjects. We have just addressed at that moment quite effectively the hole in the ozone layer at that moment with banning CFKs. So why should that not work with CO2 was the idea. So basically that at that moment 30 years ago, this agreement failed means a lot actually, I think, today, because it makes our current work so much more pressing, but also so much more difficult. Rich blames actually human nature for not being able to reach this kind of agreement. But you can also in this article read very well that perhaps it's failing government that could be blamed for this, and even bad luck, I think, wrong people at the wrong place at the wrong time. Later on, Naomi Klein reacted on this article, and she actually said we should blame capitalism, and particularly the neoliberal form of that, and large corporations that effectively actually made sure that this kind of agreement would not be installed at that moment. So it's interesting to see, and it's also interesting to now look forward to this day and age and think about what is the role of international agreements. They need to cope with all of these different elements, how to inform government, how to inform society, how to change our economy, and we have to find ways of making them operational. And how do we do that? So I would like to point towards that subject, particularly where it goes in the field of the urban and spatial planning, and how can these kind of agreements inform this kind of effective planning agenda. So basically, that's a little bit what I would like to get out of this conversation. It's a lot, but we also have quite some time, so I'm curious what we will end up at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, that's really good that you have laid the introduction for everybody. So there is some already question. I am quite sure that people will always have these questions in mind. So just I'm inviting everybody to start putting any question, even if it is to Paul, in the chat box, and we can take those up later during the discussion. Paul, do you want to comment on the Mentimeter to this question that what everybody thinks is a primary role of declaration and agreements? I can see a lot of agenda setting to set a benchmark, setting the rules of game and anticipated endpoint, values to set common goals, shared values and goals.
Well, I think it's precisely that these agreements play multiple roles at the same time, and that's why it's also important to think about how how do we relate to them? How do we use them? And it's of course not only within the boundary of the agreement itself, but also in how we react to them. I think it's interesting to see how sometimes we don't manage to use certain international agreements where it would be very possible to use them. For instance, the Sustainable Development Goals set forward by the UN. I think that is actually a very good framework to be used very much in relationship to policy development all over the world. But you see that actually within the Netherlands, for instance, this is actually very hardly used as such. And of course, that is actually a pity. It's also down to a question of how to operationalize these kind of agreements.
Exactly.
So I think it's interesting to see that there's numerous ways of looking at it, and that is exactly what is the.
Now, I think most of them are saying the same things, that this is more to set the right goals, to share the values, to set a benchmark, and to guide the whole planning process, addressing the global issues. But somebody has mentioned engagement. And maybe by end of today, I would really like to discuss this part, that these goals, how they are helping us to discuss these goals with a broader audience, how we can actually implement it, and how this can be more informed and more people are being aware about it. So that can be a good discussion towards the end of the session today. So moving to the first part of the session, I would like to invite Caroline Nevian and Flip Tenkate. Maybe it would be nice if everybody else just switch off their videos, and we have on screen Paul Gerritsen with Caroline Nevian and Flip Tenkate for the first panel discussion. Caroline Nevian is the Chief Science Officer at Gemeente Amsterdam, and she is also the Professor of Designing Urban Experience in University of Amsterdam and co-founder of WAG Societies, and a lot of new projects and new pioneered to new themes that she has been trying and testing last few years. So we are very excited to hear from you. And Flip Tenkate, he's the director of Federatie Ruimtelijke Kwaliteit. And he has previously worked as a journalist and also at the Municipality of Amsterdam. So maybe Flip, you can also tell us some stories from Amsterdam, and that can be a good talk.
Okay.
Yeah, welcome. Paul, you take over from here now. I'll stop sharing the screen.
Okay, good. Well, the first panel, we really would like to focus directly on this idea of what's the role of this kind of international agreements and declarations in planning. And I think it's important to understand that this, well, as I said, has multiple roles. How to use that, how to make it useful in the public sphere, and how to organize societal groups and stakeholders around that, both academically and also in the public sphere, and how we can organize that. So maybe I would like to first direct the first question towards Flip. Your request is really for spatial quality, and actually very often that is mistaken for keeping things as they are. Agreements about monumental change actually may lead always to a less good environment, and of course, yeah, I think we all understand change will inevitably have spatial impact. How do you cope with it? How do you relate to that? How do you see this relationship?
Yeah, I am always very, very surprised when people say that change and new developments are a problem for existing quality. in all the Dutch legislation and also the national vision on the future, they are saying we have to have a balance between development and protecting quality. But that's such a strange difference. Every development should enhance the quality. It's not a threat, but it's a opportunity to make the quality better. It's very strange that in the views of all those policymakers, new things are seen as a threat to the quality. I think that's it's absurd.
It's just a mistake. Nevertheless, if you reformulate it then the other way around, how could international agreement like, for instance, the Paris Climate Agreement be used in your perspective in order to inform change in a way that has this kind of positive quality? Because in our current debate, well, you know as well as I do, that it's not perceived as such in just a national paper. You can read more stories about how effectively it will ruin our country instead of that it will build our country or push it forward.
Yeah, I don't know where this conservative view comes from. Maybe it has something to do with the populist policy, or well, I don't know. But it can only be solved by presenting the best examples of where all those new, well, you can call it threats, or all those new developments have a very great design, and those examples exist a lot, but people don't know them. They only have the view when we are coping with the energy problem or the climate change. We have to build very high dikes, and we have to make those windmills we detest, and we have to put all those solar panels on every rooftop. But there's no, how do you call that, verbeelding?
Imagination.
Imagination. We have too little view on what might be possible. And we need designers to help us give those views.
Okay, maybe Caroline, I would like to include you now in the conversation, because I think it's not only down to designers, it's also particularly down to how we can inform this change in a positive way using scientific research. That's particularly your role in the administration in Amsterdam, to make sure that actually the city benefits from all of the existing research as best and as soon as possible. How do you see the role of declarations and international agreements in that particular role?
Yeah. Well, the thing is that for a city and for city officials, the needs of every day are dominant. So I noticed in my colleagues, they find it rather strange that I spend any time on international affairs, that I connect with Europe or networks, or, why would you spend time on other places while here we have so much trouble? So that's very dominant paradigm in many municipalities, very big paradigm. Second is that the international agreements are, and I think we should make a distinction between the SDGs and the other agreements, because the SDGs come out of the United Nations, which has been a 50-year structural collaboration between nations with all the problems, and the SDGs did not fall from the air. They have been developed over 50 years. So the SDGs, they are so simple because it's 50 years of work,
Mm.
which is behind them. And I do think
Which makes them more fundamental than, for instance, the Paris Climate Agreement.
which more easy to understand, more integral over different domains. Paris sounds like a arena for experts. It doesn't sound like I am part of it. Well, SDGs is my life. It's about my life too. So I think SDGs do play a role in the city, as far as I can see with colleagues. Also because they also resonate very deeply with a lot of values and issues that we deal with day to day. Then if you look at research, I think that it's very hard to speak about research as a general thing because we have alpha, beta, gamma, but in there we have so many different tribes and different cultures of research. I think for some people, the research is very important on the climate agreements and things like that. But I also think that as scientists, we have a problem that we don't know how to communicate about our work. And that is still today with COVID a very big problem. So as a researcher, of course, I deal with uncertainty. But policymakers cannot handle the dealing with uncertainty. They always have to, make clear that something is really the best solution. So this whole idea of how we deal with uncertainty from research and how we deal with uncertainty in policymaking or how we deal with uncertainty in our own lives is very hard. And then I think overall, I'm doing this, what you see behind me, this program, Values for Survival, in the context of the 17th Architectural Biennale. I'm the complementary research program to the Dutch representation there. And one of the things that comes out of this research program, with a very diverse group of civil servants, designers, artists, different kinds of scientists, natural scientists, social scientists, and activists, not to forget, is that in this era where we are now, it's very hard to make the relation between the planning of my personal life in relation to the planning of my neighborhood or the planning of my city, let alone the planning of my country and of Europe. So the planning, even planning has become and also you are, this context where we are now is part of it, planning has become the job of experts. Well, I plan for my life, and how do I, as a citizen, what's my relation to the experts? So the experts should deal with the agreements because it's agreements of experts, so experts should then take them on. But I don't understand the first experts, I don't understand the second expert. So I feel excluded. And then they think of that I am being participated. I feel that I am being participated. It's not my participation, I'm being participated. I hate it. I don't want to participate. I plan my life. Of course, I want to contribute to my city. Of course I want. But in a way that my responsibility and my accountability is taken serious. And it usually isn't. Nor by researchers who always think that they know better than others. Quite shocking. Yeah, so all this living lab, the researcher is still in charge. As a participant, as a resident, as a person, I cannot change the conclusion of the researcher. I cannot even argue with him in public. I'm often not that opportunity. So what I'm saying is that the international agreements, most of them are the field of experts. They exclude us. So in the best of all worlds, they resonate with our values, the values of justice, of compassion, of respect for life, of how we love each other, how we take care of children. And the SDGs are doing that. But they come out of 50 years of misery of international collaboration.
But at the same time, you see that the SDGs in the Dutch context, I always find it quite amazing, actually play very little role. I would argue that the Paris Climate Agreement in general public is much more well known than the SDGs. Oh, really? I don't know. You don't think so?
Well, it depends probably on the circle where you are. So I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, in my perception, the SDGs are, I mean, I also did, for example, with students, I work with SDGs, and I work with students on international agreements as well. SDGs, everybody understands.
Yeah, because they're so basic and
They're
going.
basic, they're about housing, they're about safety, they're about poverty, they're about climate. I mean, we understand them. They relate to my life.
Okay. So Flip, how do you see this? So basically what Caroline is saying is actually these agreements play a very important role with the experts, but that there is a big gap with the rest of society, and it's very difficult to make them useful in daily life. Actually, most of them don't, perhaps with the exception of the SDGs. How do you look at that?
I think what Carolina said was very important. How do you recognize in your daily life the values that are put down in those international visions and agreements? My experience is that debating on the level of values with citizens, with experts, they can reach out to each other and understand each other on value level. But when it comes to personal interest, there's a difference. And in the participation process, people think they should talk about their interests and not about the values, but you should start with the values and then come to relating your personal interest to this value level. Do
you have a good example of such a process?
Yeah, it's very often take our the members of our federation are the committees in every municipality that evaluate and have a role in a local panel of evaluation of housing and building schemes on the aesthetics. And when you talk about the values of a neighborhood, the historical values, people understand what you are saying, and they understand that they have to relate to those historical values. Even if it's not directly in their interest to do it. So when you agree upon the values, you can better understand each other on the personal interest level. And you can put those interests in relation to the values. Mm-hmm. Well,
can I comment with a bad example? I mean, I really appreciate what you say. But I have also an example in Amsterdam where the people and the politicians agree about the values. So this is the value about biodiversity in the neighborhood, making a food forest. So there's great agreement on the values that we need to do this. Here we are confronted with Naomi Klein, I don't know who he said, the wrong people in the wrong place. There's this community of 50 people making this food forest, but the gardeners of the city, they have mowed it down 55 times now. 55 times. That's not an incident anymore. Yeah, it's not an incident. You don't do by accident. You can mow once, yeah, but not 55 times. So there's also a force that is not interested in those agreements or values. They're just interested in their own money. This is about large contracts of mowing big spaces of land.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you need, with values, you need also justice.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I was coming to. It's very difficult for policymakers to implement those values in the regulations and the policies, and it's almost impossible.
Why?
When you speak about aesthetics, it's not. You should try to reach aesthetics, but it's not measurable. It's not. You can't say, well, you've succeeded. No, you have done your utmost, and that's enough. So we should not have regulations or laws but it should be in the process of meeting each other. You should, when we are talking about spatial quality, you should not say we will measure if the spatial quality is enough. No, you should say thou hast to talk about it. It must be an issue in every scheme, in every project. You should talk about how to better the spatial quality, and not measure if it's done. Only measure if the process is all right.
Caroline, how do you see that? Is it difficult to anchor values in policy and particularly in executing this policy?
Well, I know so many examples where it goes wrong because so I'm inclined to speak like Flip. So if I talk about a world of good people, we don't need regulation. We talk to each other and we decide how we do it, and then everything will be fine, you know. And we all give everybody a voice. The thing is that there is a huge money interest in the city. If I look at Amsterdam, there is so much financial interest, and and also beyond the understanding of most civil servants even.
Yeah.
So there's different problems. There's one problem about the data, and we don't know the data, nor the financial data, nor the eco data. We don't know most of the data as a city. So Google and so know more, but also the banks know much more about what happens in the city than the municipality does. So that's a very big issue, that as a municipality you don't have the data. Then the way we structure our data creates inequality, creates abuse of power, permits it at least. Like, for example, we talk about participation and citizens doing things. In the database of, you know, all the assets of the city, there is not a column where you can tick the thing, this is self-governed piece of city or self-governed piece of housing. So even, you know, we can have a value of participation, but the bureaucracy doesn't know how to deal with participation. We don't know how to do it. Or aesthetics for that world. Those are all values that if you can't measure them, they don't count. But also the way we do measure often doesn't even work.
So there's a lot of things standing in between that. There's actually quite a bleak picture you paint, and maybe quite along the line of what Naomi Klein says in her book, This Changes Everything, which basically says we need to change our complete understanding of the way we built up this world. The money, economic interest, the vested interest are very much there, but it's also a little bit the ignorance, the inability to use insights, data, and also the structure of the data, which sort of doesn't help. I was hoping you would say, but I also have very good examples where it can be done in a proper way.
Yes, of course.
Can you help?
Yes, they are there. Yes, of course they are there. They are there, definitely. And also you see in the long run, that things get better. But for me, it's strange. I'm an older person than most of you. So I remember very well the 80s, where there was a lot of self-governance and a lot of invention in how you could, you know, build housing with groups and energy and all that. And that's all being reinvented now after 30 years of super raw, invasive neoliberalism, capitalism. So all those things have been thrown into the bucket because of some people getting very rich, rich beyond understanding. So yes, it's possible, but I do think, and also in Amsterdam, there are different, you know, little groups of people who are smart and who have some architects and who know how to play the planning paradigm, and they do their own thing. And we have a lot of subcultures where people do their own thing. But I really think that as a bureaucracy, I mean, there is this Creative Bureaucracy Festival soon, in a few weeks. Charles Landry wrote this book, Creative Bureaucracy. So bureaucracies are extremely important. They are a weapon against dictatorship, but they're also a weapon against change. They're also, they can be played by experts.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, Kurosawa made this beautiful film, Ikuru. I don't know if anyone has seen it. It's about a civil servant who just wants to get a little playground working. Yeah, just one little playground. It's beautiful. It's just one picture of civil servants. And I have many colleagues who do their best. And I'm very proud, Amsterdam, for example, embraced circular economy. With Kate Rayworth, we start 200 projects. Very great. We have a lot of innovation in IT. We do a lot of innovation in some neighborhoods with energy and all that.
Yeah.
So that's true. We have all these, you know, little diamonds. But I feel for the next decade, if we want to make it, we need a different attitude in municipalities. We really do.
In that respect, I think it's interesting what you told me is that actually in quite a lot of cities in Europe, it will be interesting to connect to them even are people with similar roles as your own, often with different titles, but basically coming down to the same idea of shortcutting scientific knowledge, making preparing it in such a way that it can be made useful for the bureaucracies, and how this can be effectively implemented. Can you tell me a little bit about what is happening over there? You're connecting with them, and what kind of agenda is coming out of that?
Yeah, so cities are, I mean, all the big challenges of our time come down to the cities. Yeah, 75% of us live in cities in Europe, and cities don't know how to do the energy transition. I mean, there are so many problems we don't know how to do them. So what you see is that not only in Amsterdam there is now, I'm the first city science officer, but this is also happening in cities in Europe. So together with people from the Commission, from GRC and RTD, I invited 20 cities, people in my role, to come together. And we came to Brussels and to Amsterdam. And this is quite amazing because this group had immediate consensus on very big issues. And that was so nice to see that apparently, in the Dutch, you have the expression, the wall is countering the ship. So the challenges are now so vast that the municipalities don't know how to do it. So they reach out to research. And in the combination of the two, people expect a lot of things to happen. So we agree that governance and finance is a very big issue. We agree that learning and communication is a very big issue. And we agree that the agency of the city is a very big issue. So cities are very low in they're called the lower governance bodies. Well, actually, they're at the highest impact. Yeah. So we're not at the table while it happens in the cities. Yeah. And now these 20 cities have now become 35 cities. And we are now writing this report for the commissioners, where we say, as cities, we need our own interface to the commission. So if we talk energy transition, we need a special research group that works for cities and energy transition. Yeah. Yeah. Also for the universities, very hard, because they have very different formats. So we have different formats and all that. But it's a sign of the time that just alone in your own, bureau, you can't fix it. And the world will come to you if you don't go to the world. Yeah. And so it's very interesting to see that this development is happening. A lot of the commissions, DGs, they're all participating. A lot of the networks are participating now. And we really hope to develop city science as a place where the challenges of the city are the start of the research agenda. And the city guides the research, is part of the research all the way through. Yeah. Including choosing the methodologies, including validation, including different ways of publication. And what's interesting, we all agree that this marriage between science and policy can only happen when design enters the table. Because research finds out how it is, policy chooses what to do. In between, you have to develop options and scenarios and different ideas of services, how you can actually make these outcomes also in a such a way that I can enjoy them as a resident of a city or as an entrepreneur or whatever. Okay, so thank you very much for that, and also very inspiring. I think time for an
almost an international agreement about that, at least within Europe, to make it more public. With that last remark of the importance of design, I think, Flip, maybe before wrapping up, you feel very comfortable, I believe, in the role of design in this process. I can imagine that you find that also you agree with that. But I would like to direct the last question towards actually something else. In the beginning of the year, just before the corona virus really got hold of the Netherlands, maybe actually a little bit after, without us knowing, on the 5th of March, we had a big meeting organized by your organization, making the step between the international Davos Declaration towards the Netherlands. How can we use that international declaration in order to implement this focus on spatial quality in the Netherlands? But also there was a lot of focus of including civil society in this process. Can you say something about that step still?
Yeah, thank you. I think it was very urgent to have this meeting, because we are really in need of searching for new arrangements between professional, market-oriented building organizations, the commons in the society, the role of the government and the individual citizen. In fact, when you look at the new policy for spatial organization, the Omgevingswet, this new law has very much ambition in the policy, but when it comes to instrumenting, it's very bleak. And in fact, it says all those ambitions we have, it's one of the main goals is to enhance the quality of the environment, but there is no instrumentation at all in this law. In fact, it says society should do it itself, but then we have to make new arrangements between government, society, the commons as groups of people with common interests, and the individual to take it up. And we should search for those new arrangements. We don't have them yet. And that may be essential in how we make this planning process in the Netherlands
In the future.
Yeah.
Good.
That
So
help to protect the people who are not strong.
Yeah, sure.
Can I add some quick thing with Flip?
Yeah.
Because I had a question about the similar thing. Caroline mentioned towards the beginning that UN SDGs are much more integrally included in the society than, or easy to understand than the Paris Climate Agreement. So what would Flip, because you are working a lot towards this Davos Declaration, how can you compare that role? Like, do you think that is equally informed about, or people are more integrated with this declaration, or do they feel that they are being, they have that responsibility towards it?
No, not at all. That's why we organized this meeting. This Davos Declaration was already undersigned 2 years ago, and nobody ever heard about it. And it's really very important what it's stated, and our governments undersigned it, and all the European governments did. But yeah, nobody ever heard about it. So I think it's very important to put it on the agenda, and it's important for our work as to legitimize what we do, in fact. but it will never have this impact, especially for the individuals as the SDGs have.
Yes. Yeah. And one more thing Caroline mentioned, which is really interesting, and Terry Van Dyke from University of Groningen, he has been putting it already in the chat box. I don't know if he's there right now or not. Caroline mentioned that planning is becoming a job of experts. So what is the role of the citizens in relation with these agreements? Like, this is becoming detached. We are actually developing something similar to this discussion with Terry and Annette. I don't know if, Terry, are you there in the call?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Maybe you can give us a short, brief idea about this boundary spanning of planners and how planners and designers and what can be the role.
Yeah, sure. So there will be a session on October 2 where we explore a bit more on what should the planning and the planner be then in the future, what it feels to be now. And in this discussion, we also hear that planning has become distant, as science-driven, and I would also say very problem-driven, whereas in the past, planning was about imagination and about ambition and about opportunities, like Flip was also saying. And this fear against change and this fear for spatial quality is a really strange twist of mind. We're already seeing a lot of examples in a lot of countries where amazingly enriching, empowering investments have been done in the public space in cities. And why don't we see the agendas of the future also as ways to structure and enrich spatial change instead of being fearful for them, and installing a system that's mainly managing risks. And yes, as Caroline is saying, these risks are there because of the power of really big organizations and entities. But we should go back to getting things together, drafting promising outlooks to the future instead of bleak and concerning and unsettling problem statements. And that's what we're gonna explore on October 2, where we will see what should a planning be and what should a planner do in the face of the big challenges / opportunities of the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
I work a lot with students, and one of the hardest things these days is to enter into the field of imagination with the students.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our world has taken away so much imagination of our youth.
Yeah.
I have to work very hard as a teacher to get them out of the little app and the website and the Instagram and to really think out of the box. It's very hard.
They're consumers, not creators.
Yeah, they have not been trained, and they use the formats to fit themselves into formats.
Yeah.
Well, I was hoping to end a little bit on a positive note, but well, you could say there's work to be done. Huh? So in that respect, but I do think also what Caroline mentioned, that it's actually the capacity of planning in all of us. Like how can we do that? How can we organize that? Is a very challenging thought, which we want to explore the 2nd of October further. For now, I would like to thank Flip and Caroline for this first session, and maybe I give the word back to Alankrita just shortly.
Yes. Thank you so much, Carolina and Flip. It was really inspiring, and there are some other questions also coming in from Jasper from BNA. He's asking about the financing part of it, that how can the designs be realized and scaled up if they are not being financed properly. So the economic part with these sustainability goals also comes into picture, but I'm hoping that we discuss about these things more in the breakout rooms. Now we have to move to the second panel due to lack of time, and I can already see Martina coming in. Welcome Martina Huismans, and I welcome Marcia van der Vloek. Martina Huisman is an engineer, urban planner, and the wethouder of spatial order and mobility and services in the city of Delft. And she has also worked before for the Den Haag municipality and Leiden municipality, and also for Ministry of Internal Affairs. So welcome, Martina, for the second panel. And I also introduce Marcia van der Vlucht. She has also studied in TU Delft, so I can see a lot of academic professional relation over here in the discussion. And she has studied with technology policy and management, and now she has been working for last 3 years as a coordinator of spatial development in at the Ministry of Interior and Kingdom Relations. And before that, she has also worked in with infrastructure and the environment. And right now, if I'm not wrong, she is the specialized person for the international relation from the Dutch agendas towards this declarations and agreements. Floor is your, Paul. Good luck with the second panel.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I think there's a lot to take up from the first panel forward. Although I would like to shift the attention a little bit, we already did basically in our conversation towards the role of the importance of values. But I would also like to talk a little bit about the operational side of things, like how do in practice international agreements and declarations play a role in informing change. For instance, on the level of a municipality, how do you really create change let's say with the boots on the ground? And of course, I cannot leave out the subject of the importance of the Technical University of Delft, since it is in Delft. You've both have studied in Delft. You're both engineers. So basically, I think that's also an important role, like the capacity of thinking about problem solving, but also in terms of just hands-on trying it out. So maybe first I would like to go to Martina Huismans, also a member of the board, by the way, of the Delta Metropolis Association. So very nice that you could join this afternoon. How do you see this relationship between these international declarations and real change on the ground with citizens, for instance, in Delft? As you've heard from Carolina, she was not quite positive about the role in this. It's much more in the sphere of professionals that this plays a role, but not so much for citizens. Do you agree?
Well, she discussed a lot of very interesting subjects, but I will focus on how I see it from the city of Delft, because in Delft we try to, we're only a city of about 100,000 inhabitants, so it's not as large as Amsterdam. And because of our scale, we always have to find all kind of networks to make sure that our solutions are well doable. And that makes that we are often open, and we can't make our policymakers, for instance, they always have to find networks, lobby, find connections to make sure that the goals that we set as a city are doable. So that this may be a bit different from the city of Amsterdam, where there's a large democracy power. And well, for Delft, for example, I think we have 1/10 of the number of offices of policymakers. So maybe that's easier to discuss. For example, I see a lot of my policymakers on quite well, several times a month, and we discuss, for example, mobility, because mobility is one of my subjects. It's very important now with all the the carbon dioxide reduction, how to make plans to realize this. So in that point, we have had a lot of discussions of, you have these goals, their percentages, their time scales, sometimes 2050, 2030, and how to make it doable for the next coming years. I mean, as an alderman, it's only 4 years that you will be in office. And after 4 years, you have to show some of your successes and how to come to these successes in only 4 years. So that's really a difficult thing if you look at it from the politic way of thinking. But if you look at it as the more engineer way of thinking, the more technical way of thinking, 4 years is just a small amount of time to make a change. So it's always about how to get in the right direction and take little steps, but also make sure that the goals that you set and that are often quite difficult to make concrete in the short term, how to work on these. So that's what we discuss a lot about here in Delft, and where we also use the thinking force of the university we have on how to well, make sure that you can show something that's changing, but on the other side, not just have some decorations here and there, like you know, like you are decorating a Christmas tree, but that you really have something that makes the change. And I think that a lot of my colleagues in other municipalities, they struggle to find people to, on the one side, work on these concrete examples and make little changes, and on the other side, set policies that will take 10, 15 years to make the change. But well, that's the thing about scale and time that's quite difficult for a city.
Yeah. So actually, the position of Delft is quite unique in that respect. It has a certain capacity because of the sort of inhabitants it has. Very often they are attached somehow to the university, have studied there previous times, or are still studying there. It's quite a large population of students also. But at the same time, Delft is in between The Hague and Rotterdam, much larger cities, but also very much aware that basically to create some change, you need this kind of cooperation on a bigger scale, on a higher level. So that kind of capacity of wanting to change something, have learned that previously, but also are in the middle of these two large cities, and maybe even not only symbolically, but literally spanning between these two cities, and also allowing for other municipalities to cooperate.
To work with. Yes, and that is a feature that's for me as an alderman and my colleagues, where almost all of us are engineers, and that's quite different from most of our colleagues in here in the region. So we are used to think in what is possible now, what is possible in the near future, how about 10, 15, 20 years, will it still be a good solution? Because for example, in the kind of dwellings we are building these days, there are many discussions about whether these are the sustainable solution for the future. And like you were already discussing that capitalism is one of the difficult forces when it comes to sustainability. And there's a lot of discussions here in our office. Are we doing the good things for the long term? Even though in the short term, it might give us a lot of money and it will ease some of the problems we now have with all the finances in the city. But we are discussing it because we think for the long term, it might not work out a great way, and we'll have a lot of expenses to do then. But it's difficult because on the politics side, people think you're crazy not to choose the way to make the most money.
Yeah.
And that's often a thing that we are discussing, and that there are many like maintenance of the public spaces, like maintenance of all kind of mobility structures for your car or for your bikes. We can do the short term thing that might be easy, and Caroline was already talking about that. That's the way the democracy is working. It goes easily to that side, but on the other hand, you can also think of what about if we do changes? But the thing is then, yeah, well, all of my officers, they need to make mistakes to get to the right point. And that is often a thing that politicians don't really like, when they have a democracy that they're responsible for, when they are making mistakes. So you know, that is quite a difficult thing, but the nearby university helps us to talk about these things and to be aware that you have different ways of thinking about it.
Yeah.
But still, yeah, the politics of every day is quite a big thing to handle then.
Yeah, well, so in a way, you're answering the question of Caroline, or the statement of Caroline, that actually the declarations is very much therefore as a role for the professionals. But it's also almost impossible for you to answer, since so many of the inhabitants of Delft itself are actually in this professional sphere by nature somehow. So that is a quite a unique position. So it's also interesting to see how we should continue that conversation with other aldermen, perhaps elsewhere in the network. I would like now to have Marcia van der Vlucht getting into the conversation. Since you're very much from this Ministry of Internal Affairs, responsible for the international relationship where it concerns spatial development, I think you're very much in place to understand how this actually would need to work, this kind of agenda setting internationally, and then how that trickles down into real action with boots on the ground. Am I right?
Well, I don't know if I have the answer, actually, because I don't know how it's supposed to work. I just know how we're trying to make it work sometimes. Of course, it's always twofold. We're trying to see our own problems within the Netherlands and see what the goals are and see how we can get that back into the international agendas. For instance, for the Netherlands, when looking at energy transition, literally space is a problem. We're a small country, we're a dense country, we don't have a lot of space, and other countries might have. So cooperation within the agenda and making sure that the other countries understand that your focus might be a bit different, because space is a problem when looking at the energy transition. So that's, you know, getting your own problems into the picture of the international agendas. But it's also the other way around, of course. We have the international agendas, which the Netherlands commits itself to. So how do you get those into your own spatial vision? But also, how do you help, for instance, local municipalities like Delft to get a hands-on feeling of what that means? And in a previous job, I worked for the Delta program as a program manager for the incentive program for spatial adaptation. And when you look at one of the things that was done in the Delta program, namely translating all the data that was in European context, well, gained actually with European money, with research programs, but it was put into the Climate Effect Atlas, which was actually trying to make it in a sort of user interface, to talk in engineers' terms, to make it easier for municipalities and little places to see, okay, so what does that actually mean? What does all this data mean? How can I actually react to it? So making a clear sort of map and atlas and seeing, okay, what's the problem where I live? Is it a heat spot? Is it a water problem? Is it? So I think your goal is to work together on gaining data, work together on looking at the common goals, work together on finding common problems like we do in the urban agenda for the EU. But also, as a Dutch government, try to make the translation between the problems we get from different municipalities and the other way around, trying to help them with, okay, we have all this, but how can they use it? And we do that in different programs. We do that for spatial planning within the ESPON program, trying to get concrete instruments for local policymakers. But as I said, I don't have the answer. I don't know how it's supposed to work. I just know what we're trying to do to get it into more concrete steps.
Yeah, so basically you're saying it works both ways. Eh? So it's also setting problems seen by Dutch municipalities, Dutch citizens, Dutch circumstances on the international agenda. And at the same time, the other way around, from the agreements, how do we implement it? How do we cooperate within the Netherlands to reach these kind of agreements? I think it's interesting that you mentioned something that Carolina also pointed towards, that actually the importance of making data useful, making data informative, which is a huge challenge. And indeed, it's somewhat positive experiences within the Delta program, but still a lot to be developed in that respect. And that is actually very fundamental in informing real change, so that we can understand where's the problem at, and actually have participation in that. Martina, do you agree with that last point? Have you had experience with that in the Delft circumstances?
Well, for example, in Delft, but also in the whole metropole of Delft, the Rotterdam, The Hague, we're working on a CO2 the reduction in mobility, and it's quite easy to make up a list of or a menu with all kind of things that you could do to reduce the levels, but then you have to switch to the way to implement these projects that are told. And the thing is that a lot of the municipalities find it very difficult to translate them to their local needs and the local issues, local context. And for example, if you talk about well, making biking and cycling more interesting and the use of cars less interesting, there are several ways to work on that. But for the city of Delft, it's easier to say, well, you can park your car here, or you can ride your car in this street. For other municipalities, that's quite difficult. But then the goals are set on a regional scale, and they all sound quite okay. But once you get to the level of the municipalities, it's sometimes very difficult to set that aim. And where Delft just says, okay, we're going to do it here, and it will start then. Other municipalities will it will take maybe 10 years before they can implement such a quite an effective plan. And that goes down with all kind of mobility changes, that you're very much depending on the kind of municipality where the changes have to be made. So from the view from a national government, it's like, well, the region can work on this, but the region just really doesn't exist. So I think, and then you can make a toolkit, and you can make all kind of easy to implement ways to do things. But on the local scale, you sometimes meet a lot of differences that makes it really difficult, for example, for politicians to make the right decisions, even though it should be doable. But then it's maybe a bit too abstract, or maybe a bit too well, it's quite difficult to make it in a certain political environment to a next step, and that's often not measured in all the ways the plans are made. So, and that's, but because of the decision making and the money that's needed, that has to come from the city council, it's a very difficult level to cross then.
Yeah. Okay. So it will be interesting to hear something from Marcia about it, but first, still a question about that, because basically, do you feel then in the end that this kind of let's say monumental, very abstract global international agreements, do they then finally help in this process, or is actually the other way around? Would it be much more profitable or doable if the incentives comes much more from the local scale and then adds up upwards towards something of a communal goal? Or is that kind of stick from this kind of international agreement, is that important in order to push things forward?
Well, to start with this carbon dioxide reduction, it was good to say, well, we have to have a reduction of 30% for that and that date. But once we had to translate it to doable plans for the different municipalities, it's now more about a sustainable city, about a nice environment to live, about a livable city, about the healthy city, and it's no longer about reduction of carbon dioxide. So once we got rid of that bit, and it's quite an important goal if you look at it globally or national, but to make it more doable for all these aldermen that have to find the money and have to go to the next step to do all these projects. It's not now about health, because health is what people understand and what they like, and especially in the beginning of the Corona time, there were just a few cars on the street, and the sky was blue because there were no planes, and that made visible what a livable and healthy city could look like. So we now transformed this CO2 reduction to healthy cities, and now it's much more easy for the different aldermen to work on it. So you have to find a way to make it the story acceptable.
Yeah, so in that respect, also something coming from the first conversation, that it's very important to have values that are meaningful to citizens. And
just what Caroline told us net.
Yeah, and then there's a role in the municipality in translating this, making this translation from this kind of international abstract agreement towards something that's meaningful for citizens. So Marcia, are you aware of that? Are you seeing it in similar ways?
Well, of course I am. I mean, what you have within the Netherlands that locally is different from regionally is different from nationally. We also get that within Europe. We always say territory matters. It's completely different living in mountains than it is living in the Netherlands. Even though you all need the same healthy, sustainable, livable cities. But that's why I always say it's so important to actually be able to translate and also be able to work together with for instance, again, the urban agenda. There's these different working groups of cities that experience the same problems. It's not that everybody has to be in a working group, but if you experience a certain problem, you can work together with different cities within Europe and find common problems and share solutions and share knowledge. And even within the Netherlands, we are talking about municipalities, but there's also regions within the Netherlands that have different problems because they're not cities, as we call them, cities within the Netherlands. And even if you look at that, I mean, the Netherlands is completely different from a metropolitan area like London or Paris. So territory matters, and solutions are not all viable. There's not the one solution. And that's what I mean when saying we have to try to make a translation from these global goals towards, okay, but what does that mean for me? What does that mean for the Netherlands when it comes to space, when it comes to energy transition, but also when we look at the Netherlands again, what do we do within certain regions? And even if we have, as Martina said, a goal in the Regio Haaglanden, what does that mean for Delft? Because Delft is again different. So yeah, that's what I meant by it's always twofold. And that's why I said it's more about cooperation and sharing knowledge, and that's what I answered the first question about sharing and cooperation, because the goals are quite broadly declarated within these declarations, but what does that mean, and what does that mean for a certain person? And even though we talked about in the last couple of minutes in the previous session about maybe people don't have imagination anymore, and we have to keep in mind the people that cannot talk for themselves. That's all true, but I try to be a bit more optimistic, and I have a child now going to the Design Academy in Eindhoven, and I remember people coming from the Design Academy in Eindhoven and giving me solutions when I was still working for the Delta program. So I'm all optimistic about, having people working together, because when you bring it to a local level, you talk about people and you talk about your neighbor who I walk the dog for. And it's little things like that. You have to always, I don't know the solution, but it's always about communicating and making it twofold and making it territorially sane, the solution, a viable solution for your local problem.
Yeah, so very important, the international exchange of ideas, the inspiration also in that respect. But in the end, we still need to reach certain goals, and they need to add up. And there's also a certain risk that while exchanging ideas, being inspired and enthusiastic, we will not, in the end, meet these goals. How do you see that? There is some sort of bookkeeping needing to be done, right? Or how does that?
There is bookkeeping that needs to be done. So there is certain rules you make, but you don't over-regulate.
We've seen it, for instance, with the nitrogen crisis at the moment. I think it's a very good example of how not being able to meet certain goals leads to a very almost surreal crisis overnight. Perceptibly, not for the experts, but for my next door neighbor. They really don't understand how this worked out, but it has a lot to do with not being able to keep to these international agreements.
Yes, and that also has to do with making sure that you know the differences within different regions. Because that, of course, is very much a problem within the Netherlands, where, of course, we again have a dense country, but if we are also the corridor from the harbor of Rotterdam towards Ruhrgebiet and different areas. So again, this is are we talking about what can we do? What are the solutions? And can we put it into rules? Or are we also talking about putting things into context and making sure that you know what it means? What is the territorial impact of the European rules, for instance? And spatial planning is not something Europe can do. It's all the member states. It's spatial planning is of the member states. But of course, different rules we have within Europe, for instance, on climate, have their effect on what you can do spatially. So that's why it's such a difficult problem, and making sure that you know what is the territorial impact. Are we doing enough territorial impact analysis? How can we do that? And what does it mean? And yes, you're right. At this point, we have a problem with the European rules saying, okay, you're out of boundaries, fix this. And then, of course, there's all these different areas within the Netherlands, again, where the problem is bigger or lesser. And sometimes it's more of a problem for building houses because we have a housing problem, and somewhere it's more of a problem for farming. So it's, again, the translation and making sure that you know how these rules actually add up for your region. So yeah, no, I agree. We have to keep a certain bookkeeping, but I also think that if we overregulate and if we don't have attention for what it locally means, we have a problem. And even if we don't have attention for what it locally means, if you just look at rules, you might not find very good innovative solutions.
Can I ask one point here, Paul? Is it okay?
Sure.
Yeah. So
go ahead. Are there also some questions in the chat, or is that?
Yes, there are
okay?
questions. I'll just take it up, but quickly, just one point what Marcia was already talking about. So, of course, the global agreements needs to be translated in the Dutch agenda. And if I'm not wrong, that is somehow your role that you're playing as a project manager of international relations. And
well,
yeah.
For certain agendas, yes. So, of course, for the territorial agenda, which is a spatial agenda, we try to translate these agreements, the Paris Agreement, the Green Deal. We are with the different member states talking about what is the new territorial agenda after 2020, so the territorial agenda for 2030. What does it look like? How do we translate these agendas into this territorial agenda? And we also do that for common European research programs. What's the focus going to be? What's the goal of the program? What kind of pilots can we do within that? What research do we need? So for a certain part, because there's a lot, of course, a lot more, but yes, for a certain part within Europe, yes.
Yeah, so then those that after it is being translated in the Dutch agenda, it needs to somehow transfer in the local scale. So be it the regional scale, be it coming from the national scale, it needs to be transferred to the regional scale, the municipality scale, and the local scale. Can you share with us some, like, of course, you mentioned already that we don't want to regulate too much, but at the same time, are there any framework of guidelines or any subsidies or any initiatives that the local scale or the regional scale can follow for these to actually adapt these new agreements, actually adapt this? So this is, I'm asking you from very much from the ministry role.
Well, of course, we are, what we've tried to do is get these agreements translated into a national strategy for spatial planning in the environment. So the Dutch version, the NOVI. Yeah. And if you look at the goals there, and if you look at some of the aspects that are mentioned, they translate quite clearly into some of the agreement goals. And we've also said it's for the first time an agenda which will be developed, and we are also making regional agendas. Yeah. So the NOVI is, first of all, not just nationally written down, it's in cooperation with the municipalities in the provinces. And what it clearly tries to do is say, okay, but this is the national goal, but we have different regions with different problems. So yes, Twente is different from Haaglanden. So if we look at a regional agenda, the focus will be different.
Yeah, yeah. Martina, do you want to comment here something about, as an alderman from a city of Netherlands, what kind of expectations do you have from the national government or from the ministry to actually, like, how they can help you in certain way to adapt these guidelines?
Well, the thing is not just the internal affairs that we have to work with as a city. There are many ministries that work with several with difficult parts of spatial planning, if you look at it, because you have like mobility or agriculture. These are different ministries. And sometimes it's already within a ministry difficult to make sure that everything fits and that it's an integral plan that's worked on. Because, for example, if you look at mobility and about the way to reduce this carbon dioxide, you have to not just work on the regulation and the short-term effects, but also on the structure of where are you living, where are you working, how long is the distance that you're traveling each day, is it possible to work at home, where do your children go to school, where do you do your shopping, and that all will work to help to reduce carbon dioxide. But this structure that will be in the NOVI, that's one of the things that is difficult to talk about, for instance, with the Ministry of Infrastructure. Yeah. And they do have schemes that are already planning for up to 2030. And a lot of the very important infrastructures are already planned, but like housing or maybe working areas are still in development. And I think that NOVI as an image of 2030, maybe 2040 is okay, but how to get there and the steps to be taken and what will be there first? Will it be the housing? Will it be the public transport? Will it be the cycling tracks? We really have to think of how we are going to do that. And the thing is, for a bit, we will be looking at the national government, but the provinces, or for instance, the metropolitan region, all these levels, all these different scales are needed to make a coherent a spatial plan and also a way to implement things. Because when you do it in a different order, there might be things going wrong, because once people get into the car, they will never get out of it. or it will be very hard and cost you a lot of money and time to operate. So, and I think the discussion about these topics is often difficult because there's so many ministries involved and so many offers who have different things about policies.
Yeah, so basically the integration that is the starting point of the National Environmental Vision still has to be delivered from the different ministries working together on a level that is so integrated that you can do something. It's interesting to see in the chat that actually Fred Goedbloed, whom you might know, Martina, from the municipality of Leiden, actually also mentioned that. He says the national agenda is filtered by the province before it enters the municipal dialogue. Hinting a little bit at maybe a problem, rather than thinking, well, you have to do it together with the different skill levels. He suggests a certain distance that is gained by having the provinces in between. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think for Leiden, the situation is a bit different from what it is for the metropole region here, because Delft is part of the Rotterdam-The Hague area, and we do have our own mobility region and also our own finances, and Leiden is part of the provinces and has to deal with that. And one of the problems of the provinces is, but it's my own opinion, it's not something that's measurable, but my opinion is that the provinces want to do something for the cities, but also for the smaller municipalities. And because of that, the money is just spread like it's some layer that has to equally be divided. And when you look at the NOVI and the very important bits that have to be worked on, then you have to make decisions like Leiden needs some extra money for this, and oh, that's sorry for Alphen aan den Rijn, but they won't get money for this. But the thing is that everyone has to have an equal share, and that sometimes makes it difficult. And I can imagine that filtering by the provinces might be something like that, because when you want to have a very sustainable planning, then it means that not everyone gets the same amount of money to do things. You have very important projects that you have to do now, and maybe projects that are not that important. So, but that's difficult because we do have some equality. Equal thinking in the Netherlands that might be not that helpful sometimes.
So again, actually, money coming in as a rather hindrance than as something to create opportunity, which of course it should do. Maybe as a last point, I also saw still a question from Caroline towards Marcia. She asks, how do values play a role in your work at the ministry, actually? Can you say something about that? So real core values, are they part of the discussion, or is that,
well,
is that already so much?
I can only answer. I can answer for me as a person.
Of course, yeah.
And when looking at my colleagues, for instance, the 4th national report on the SDGs, we put sustainable urbanization as an agenda point within that. And that's from working within, always thinking, okay, we're looking at the development of the Netherlands, we're looking at the cities, what do we want? We want it to be connected to what Martina said, people living there and going to work, etc. So I can't speak at that level because I'm at the ministry and I do European work. So sometimes it, for me, feels like it's all going, you know, high over and that's it. But when I work, I try to think from these values and try to translate that into, okay, I'm working on the SDG report now. What can I say about where we need to make connections, what's important? And that's what I do every day, trying to think from, well, making this world hopefully still livable for my grandchildren, which are hopefully coming soon, because I've been telling my children to give me grandchildren. No, but kidding. But honestly, you try to do that within your work continuously, I think. But that's from a personal view. And when working at the ministry, I see that all around me. I mean, the things we write down, we do that because we value the international agreements, and the international agreements actually get put into effect by, as the Netherlands, working really hard to make an urban agenda for the EU. Yeah. So yeah, it's continuously, for me, something that's there, but yeah, maybe I'm just an optimist.
Well, you need to be, I think, in your line of work, but maybe as a last, very last point, since we're all engineers, all having studied at TU Delft, do you feel it's an hindrance or actually a quality that you studied at Delft University? How do you perceive that? Maybe also for Martina, but first Marcia.
Well, I always say I studied the thing that was always the translation thing, because I went to system engineering, policy analysis and management. So what they always taught me is you're like the Swiss knife. You can't do anything properly, but you know how it all works. And so up to now, it's been an advantage, because I've always thought, okay, I know a little bit
You're a
about
special engineer.
and I know about, but I can actually make the translation towards politics and towards agendas and towards my next door neighbor, because that's what I've been taught, to know just enough to make it into a story which can actually grab. And I kind of agree with Caroline there that the SDGs is something that people can grasp easily. But I do hope that we can make the story from the Paris Agreement, maybe in 20 years, but we can make it as grabbable for people as well. So. Okay,
Martina, also for you, I guess you're also a special kind of engineer. I remember when studying at the Faculty of Architecture that we were never really regarded as real engineers. How do you look at that?
Well, it was just the first thing that I was thinking when you asked me this question, because we're not really the hardcore engineers, for example, the mechanical engineers or the civil engineers, but still the way of thinking that you learn during your studies is that you have an analytical way of looking at things, and also an open mind that the solution that's most likable to be your solution can often be disguised, or can look different from what would really be necessary to do. And as a politician, you're always looking for solutions that are easy to explain, and everyone hope, well, that will be the thing to do. But sometimes there's a solution behind that one that's a bit more difficult to explain, but might be better working for a longer term. And we often notice it in our with the aldermen that I'm working for here in the city center, is that we always looking for solutions that are not the first to think of, but that's sometimes difficult to explain to the municipality or to the city council to understand. And well, sometimes they say that we're too abstract and too far away from reality. So we always have to be talking to the people of the city to know what they really want and what they can understand. Because I really agree with Caroline that you have to make a goal that you're working on very accessible and very everyone needs to have a picture of it straight away. And if you have to explain it too much, then it's not a good goal to work on.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you very much, Martina Huismans, Marcia van der Vlucht. Both of you, thank you very much for this conversation. Back to you, Alan-Griete.
Yes, thank you so much. There are already other questions coming in the chat, but I think it would be better that we take a quick break and then we come back to the breakout room sessions and with the presentations at the beginning, and then we take up these questions. So let's come back in 10 minutes with a cup of coffee, and please do not leave the meeting. Just switch off your audio and video, and that should be fine. And one other thing is we have already sent you the instructions for Miro board. So we are also testing and trying this. Please try to quickly log in the Miro board, because after we come back, we will talk about it more. Thank you. See you in 10 minutes.